Oh, it's a massive story, this. It went absolutely viral, and rightly so. So the London Mayor, Sir Sadiq, sparked absolute outrage when he refused to work with reform. I would also say this, it wasn't just that, it's the fact that he obviously, in my view, doesn't seem to care about kids getting killed. Here's the clip.
It has only just begun, and already we've seen at least 9 major stabbing incidents on our streets. My team has been working on a budget amendment where we would like to fund almost 1,000 police officers to deliver a targeted knife crime task force. And the way we do this is reduce the cost of your staff budget back to 2016 levels. That would give us the funding to do this. Now, would you encourage members of other groups, perhaps your own group in the Labour Party, perhaps the Conservatives, perhaps anybody, to second that amendment?
As a rule of thumb, I never encourage anyone to work with reform.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that we are joined now by that man, not Sadiq, don't worry, that man, Alex Wilson. Alex, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, great to be
here.
So,
look, he did not seem to care. He just said, I'm not going to work with reform. He didn't actually address the fact that, like, kids are getting stabbed to death, did he?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are already 9 major stabbing incidents into the new year in London. New Year's only just begun, and it's every other day something terrible is happening on London streets. And I wanted to use this opportunity to raise that as an issue. It's the most serious issue that people talk to me about, constituents, residents across London. And it's even Mopac's own figures, their own surveys show that 70% of Londoners see tackling knife and gun crime as one of their top priorities. So that's what we've got to be doing. And that's why I wanted to raise the opportunity to do it. We've come up with a plan as part of what we'd like to table as a budget amendment. Now, whether or not I get support from other groups to table it is another question. But I would like to table a plan where we can fund almost 1,000 officers to set up a dedicated knife crime task force to do things like ramping up stop and search, greater police presence on the streets, and weapons sweeps across key areas of London. And the way we fund that is by tackling Sadiq's bloated staff budget.
Talk to me about that. So look, obviously Sadiq Khan is not here to defend himself. He would never come on anyway. So, when you say, we're going to fund this by tackling his bloated budget, what do you mean by that?
Well, the headcount in his team, his office, has pretty much doubled since he became mayor in 2016. Now, back in 2016, I don't remember anyone saying that Boris didn't have enough people working for him, that London was undergoverned. So the headcount has doubled, the cost of that has tripled. So if we pair it back to 2016 levels, we can save...
And we're talking about like media...
It's across the piece.
We're not talking about, we're talking about people who get Sadiq Khan a coffee.
Yeah, it's not frontline TfL or Mopac or Met police staff doing the job of actually delivering safer and a moving London. It's about City Hall headcount. And so we can save £75 million, we can use that to fund almost 1,000 officers, and that's what I want to task them to do.
The reason why I think it's important, and look, hey, I think a lot of news organisations regularly fall into the trap of being too London-centric. And I don't like that. What I will say about this is London is our capital city, and it is a representation of our country to the world. It is. So if London is sick, then the country's sick, I think, to an extent. We heard Sadiq Khan, who has previously been very dismissive of Susan Hall. She raised, I appreciate she's, it's not your party, but she raised when she was running for mayor this just rampant knife crime that was going on. And he said, it's not an episode of The Wire. So he just dismissed it. But today, again, he said this. I think we've got a little clip for you now.
I asked you this question last week and you found every which way but not to answer it. Just how many grooming gangs have we got in London?
To avoid any misunderstanding, can she define what she means by that?
That's ridiculous, isn't it? He obviously knows, what do you make? Go on, you say. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I was there at the meeting. Obviously, it was the same meeting that I was questioning him on, and it's sort of ridiculous back and forth. He was trying to goad Susan into saying something that would enable him to then play the race card and reply, and it's just outrageous. He's not taking that issue seriously, just like he isn't taking the knife crime issue seriously. The London Assembly is there to represent all of Londoners. We're all elected across a range of parties, and the way that it's structured should encourage people to work together. Despite their political differences, there are issues we can come together on behalf of all Londoners and do that. But today he showed very clearly he's not interested in that. The way that he was so dismissive and said, because I was asking for people not even to necessarily agree with what I was proposing, but just to get it on the table, to get it debated.
Well, let's be clear about this. It sounded to me as though, whilst you are obviously Reform UK, it sounded to me as though you would have been willing to work with any political party.
Yep.
Like any.
Absolutely.
As long as that got on the table.
All I wanted was to have him to suggest or encourage members of any other group to second them. Because the way that the Assembly is structured, I'm a single member, I'm not a member of a group, therefore, to get anything formally tabled, debated, it needs a seconder.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for. Whether they then agree or disagree with having debated it, that's a different matter, but just get it on the table. But he said, no, nobody should work with reform at all. We're all elected at the same time to serve all of London. And I respect his mandate to do what he's doing. You should respect my mandate to do what I'm doing as well.
Look, hey, he's won 3 times, right? And he has. He's been returned in a democratic vote, and fair play to the guy. Fair play. He stood for election 3 times. It's not an easy job. I would politely say, when we end up writing the history books on this, what has Sadiq actually done? Yeah, what is it? When you go outside, can you touch something that Sadiq Khan has done that you think is good? For a bloke who's been in power for that long, I don't think so. And the thing for me, anyway, and again, Sadiq would deny this, and he would probably come up with a huge catalogue of things that he's done very well. But to be so dismissive in the 2 clips I've said there about, by the way, a disproportionately ethnic minority kids getting stabbed to death, and victims of rape gangs, to just bat that off, I think, to me, I just don't think he cares.
Well, after 8.5 years of Sadiq as Mayor of London, we have a city that is less safe, that is more congested, and it's harder than ever to get on the proper
One
level.
rape every hour reported.
Indeed, and 52,000 phones stolen a year, that's 1,000 every week. That's not a healthy city, but it's up to all of us to try and challenge that and show that there is a better way of doing things going forward.
You couldn't... Look, by the way, I'm not, again, I can hear Sadiq Khan's lawyers in my ear here, so I'm not, it's not an easy job, but I couldn't sleep at night. If I was the mayor of a city that had a rape every hour, that had this stabathon that we have, that would affect... I think that would bother me. Obviously. He seems to sleep very well. I don't quite understand it. Maybe he's just built different. Maybe that's why people go into positions of power. I don't know, but I couldn't operate like that. But anyway, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
On the show. All right, so I hope to see you again very soon anyway. So that is, of course, Alex Wilson, who's a Reform UK London Assembly member and the man who went viral everywhere earlier on with that clip that I played you earlier on. So, well, I thought anyone who cared about Pakistani rape gangs was far-right Prime Minister.
Politicians who sat in government for many years, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right.
And just in case Labour get on the phone and say that we've taken that out of context, Starmer doubled down in the Commons.
Right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations.
Well, I would argue that Labour have been very clear on this. They don't care. But then, of course, they were confronted by you, the public. So Sarah Champion, the Labour MP for Rotherham, who was initially told, in my view, to shut up about grooming gangs, said this to Reform MP Rupert Lowe a few days ago.
I feel disgusted by what the Honourable Gentleman has just said. Can you imagine if you're a victim or survivor listening to that? I'm sure his intent is to get to the truth and get justice. But the language, please think about who hears our words.
Oh, the language, yeah. And then, remarkably, she's had a massive change of heart, hasn't she? As did Labour's Rochdale MP, Paul Waugh. So, to be clear, both of them failed to vote in favour of an actual inquiry, and miraculously, they went home on Friday to their constituencies, and they came back with a completely different view. Make no mistake, when we heard this today...
So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas. That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels or drawing on the experience of the Independent Inquiry Truth Project.
It might not be perfect, but you did that. You did. That was public pressure that led to the Home Secretary eventually saying that. Hopefully the truth comes out. And when I say the truth, I mean the whole truth. Like this. A 15-year-old girl was found guilty of soliciting prostitution, and the magistrate who found her guilty was the same man who paid her for sex. Do you not think we maybe need an inquiry into that kind of stuff? So, Yvette Cooper has caved into your pressure. Well done. That's people power, isn't it? But we've got more to do, haven't we? Let's get the views of my panel this evening. We've got former Conservative MP Anna Firth, we've got Tory peer Lord Sean Bailey, and we've also got ex-Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Anna, what do you make of this? So, look, hey, ultimately, has Yvette Cooper landed on the right thing here? We're going to get some form of inquiry?
Well, I mean, it's progress. I think the first thing I want to say, Patrick, though, is huge congratulations to GB News, Charlie Peters, and everything that you've been doing over the last
Well, Charlie
week.
really, mate, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, you've done a huge amount on this channel, and you are making a difference, and that's a very, very good thing. But this is too little, too late. Now, obviously, people are going to say, well, nothing's been done before, but here we are. Let's do the right thing now. Fine, she's announced something into 5 towns and cities, but you've uncovered 50.
50, yeah.
So what about the other 45? What do the parents and the victims in the other 45 towns feel like? They feel like they've been shortchanged because they have. It's insulting, it's shameful.
So this is... Sure, look, hey, you know, you've been in politics a long time. This, I think, from Yvette Cooper and the Labour Party, is a way of kind of massaging it, right? So you can't now have a full frontal national inquiry because you denied that. So what she's doing here, my understanding is she's saying that we're going to have a local inquiry into a variety of different places, which I think the taxpayer has to pay, the local taxpayer has to pay for. It's not really what everyone was calling for, is it?
Look, the bottom line is this is not enough. It should have been a national inquiry. Some of the things that have been reported on this channel, which are clearly true, are so utterly disgusting. They need the weight of an inquiry that can compel people to give evidence. Without that, the inquiry will be weak. The other trap that we mustn't fall into, that Yvette Cooper seems to be falling into, is the idea that we need to change the law. It was illegal then, and it remains illegal now.
Well, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if you're abusing a child, it's always been illegal.
The key, what we really need to get to the bottom of was why wasn't the law enforced? And she's correct, there has been lots of inquiries. Where she's incorrect is saying nothing has been done. The last government instituted an inquiry that led to 550 prosecutions. Was it enough? No. But it's wrong to say nothing was done.
Look, Matthew, what do you make of what Yvette Cooper said there? Because the cynic in me, and that is quite a large human, the cynic in me would say, well, this time last week we were talking, there was a 3-line whip out. You know, you couldn't have voted for this. Labour said we can't vote. Starmer abstained himself, and then here we are, which is as I understand it, I'm willing to be corrected on this, as I understand it, a locally funded...
No, I think they're locally organised, but there's 5 million quid to run them.
So there's Home Office.
My understanding is that the Home Office is now putting a pot of money together, which will then the local inquiries will draw on. So one of the problems at Oldham, which was what the original Jess Phillips letter, when they wrote to Jess Phillips, was we haven't got any money to do this, so we can't do this because we can't afford it. Look, I think the government's arrived at the right place because I think what we need to do is have rapid action. I think it would have been better if the government had sort of said this in the first place, if it said we don't want a national inquiry because we think that the J report covered it, whether you be good or not, but you know that's their line. But they sort of got into a mess because they didn't put this plan in place once they rejected the national inquiry. This seems to me they're based on the model in Telford, which had a particularly bad problem, and which was an inquiry that I think was welcomed and actually took action. I mean, one of the other things she's doing is she's getting the police to reopen cold cases, which I think is really important, so that those survivors can get justice. There's also going to be an independent group people can turn to. Because as you saw, one of the problems was people didn't want to keep going back to their local police officers who'd been rejecting their claims.
So, look, to be fair, opening cold cases is a very powerful thing to do and needs to be done. Where I'm a little disappointed is we've been told we shouldn't be made a political football, etc. Jess Phillips was so strong on this when she was in opposition. I wanted to see her make this announcement. I want to see her lead on it. It falls under her department.
Well, it's still on the hoof, isn't it? Look, with respect, they may well have ended up in something like the right place, maybe.
No, they haven't, Matt.
OK, go on.
They absolutely haven't. There's an extremely good thread out today by an education minister called Neil O'Brien, and he has shown very clearly how the data is not being collected properly across the country for child sexual exploitation offences. It's a very, very different pattern, and that is exactly the sort of thing that has to be looked at nationally.
I agree with you. What I suspect is going to happen here is we're going to have a broad inquiry into child sexual abuse that will include things like the Church of England or the Catholic Church or whatever. And, all right, OK, yeah, any child sexual abuse should be looked into. Don't get me wrong. But the actual clamour at the moment is for a specific investigation into how widespread
these local ones will be.
Pakistani rape gangs are. And I don't think they're going to do that.
Let's be very clear. If this inquiry isn't focused on this particular issue, if it is a weak, shallow inquiry, it will fuel the feeling of a cover-up. And this government...
I think it would if they did, but I think what they're going to be specific.
Needs to understand that it is the government, and at some point it's no longer about politics. Please do not fuel the feeling of a cover-up.
So I think you're right, Sean. I think people would. I think one of the things the government wants is to do it specifically into the child grooming cases and the gangs in these 5 towns. More is maybe added later, but these 5 towns to start off with. One of the things, just to come back to your point about, and the point that Anna was making about the data, is the data has been, there have been problems with the data. It wasn't collected initially. What she's done today, Yvette Cooper, said that there must be proper data on the ethnic makeup of gangs. Yeah, we know some of it. It's been piecing it together. People like Charlie have been piecing it together.
1 in 73 Pakistani men in Rotherham have been prosecuted successfully for this.
But now the data must be done.
Any inquiry that cannot compel witnesses to come and attend and cannot ask for specific data or evidence is not an inquiry worth its name. It's got to have the full powers under the Inquiry Act 2005, and none of these local inquiries will have that. This is the biggest child exploitation scandal in our lifetime. I was horrified, I'm sure you were, to read some of those accounts from the courts over Christmas. I found it difficult to read. I was so ashamed that I didn't even know about it.
Whilst I absolutely respect what you're saying, and there are new things, you know, you go into more detail, like what I read out about the magistrate earlier and all of that stuff. I understand that. But you could have done, not you personally, but the Tories could have done something about this 40
But we did.
I mean, there was...
the only thing, I'm not going to be deflected from that, because that is a deflection, Patrick, because we are here now and this problem's got to be solved. It's institutional failure on an epic scale, and only a national inquiry will deal with it.
So why is that unfair, what I've said, though?
I'll tell you what's unfair, because the Tories did do a lot. I contend they didn't do enough, because until this is finished, nobody's done enough. But we did do enough, and that's why I made the point about political football. When it suited Labour, they turned it into political football, which when you're the government you don't need to do. If there's any time you should set the politics aside and say, we'll wear this as the government, this is the time.